Good evening, and thank you for joining tonight's presentation of what is Lewy Body Dementia, Understanding the Signs and Treatment Options. I'm Karen Carter, Director of Community Outreach for the Kensington Reston, an assisted living and memory care community located in Reston, Virginia. At the Kensington, we have a passion for excellence and quality of care for our residents. We provide 24-hour on-site nursing, high care partner-to-resident ratios, highly trained and competent team members, enriching and meaningful activities, and delicious dining entrees, all in a beautiful and safe environment that feels just like home. We partner with organizations that share our values to make the world a better place for people living with dementia and their families. So just a couple of quick housekeeping items before we start. This presentation is in webinar format, which means your camera and microphones are off. If you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to type them in the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen. This evening's presenter will take time at the end of the presentation to answer a few of your questions. I am pleased to introduce the Kensington Reston's very own Megan Dingwall. Megan comes from years of experience in memory care assisted living. Megan attended East Carolina University, where she received her undergraduate degree in recreation therapy, and is currently attending George Mason University, where she's obtaining her master's in healthcare administration and health systems management. In addition to her degrees, Megan is a certified dementia practitioner, PAC certified, and a certified Alzheimer and dementia care trainer. The culmination of her experiences and her education led her to provide an engaging, fulfilling, caring life for residents at Kensington Reston. Megan takes a holistic approach to care and believes in meaningful engagement throughout one's lifetime. It's Megan's passion to enrich the lives of those living with a cognitive impairment and ensure their safety, health, and well-being. Ladies and gentlemen, Megan Dingwall.
Hi, Karen. Thank you so much for that. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. So some things that we're going to be talking about is Lewy body dementia, some of the causes, signs, and symptoms, kind of some things to expect once a diagnosis is made, some of the challenges that a caregiver, a loved one, or the person itself might face once they do have this diagnosis, and some tools for managing everyday life post-diagnosis. So Lewy body dementia, above all else, is a form of dementia. Scientists go kind of back and forth between whether vascular dementia or Lewy body dementia is the second most common form after Alzheimer's. But the thing that makes Lewy body dementia very unique is the protein deposits, which are actually called Lewy bodies, develop in nerve cells in the brain regions, and those types of regions are involved in thinking, memory, and movement. Lewy body dementia causes a progressive decline in mental abilities, and people with Lewy body dementia might have visual hallucinations and changes in alertness and attention. And other effects include Parkinson's disease signs and symptoms such as rigid muscles, slow movement, walking difficulties, and tremors. So kind of as I mentioned, it's very similar to Parkinson's disease dementia. Many people with Parkinson's eventually develop problems with thinking and reasoning, and many people with Lewy body dementia experience movement symptoms such as hunched posture, rigid muscles, a shuffling walk, and trouble initiating movement. The overlap in symptoms and other evidence suggests that Lewy body dementia, Parkinson's disease, and Parkinson's disease dementia may be linked to the same underlying abnormalities in how the brain processes the protein alpha-synuclein. And many people with both Lewy body dementia and Parkinson's dementia also have plagues and tangles, which are hallmark brain changes linked to Alzheimer's disease. So Lewy body dementia is characterized by the abnormal buildup of proteins into masses known as Lewy bodies. This protein is also associated with Parkinson's disease. People who have Lewy bodies in their brains also have the plaques and tangles associated with Alzheimer's. Lewy bodies, named after the scientist who discovered them, are made of a protein called alpha-synuclein. And when they build up, they keep your brain from making the right amount of two important chemicals. One of them, called acetylcholine, affects your memory and learning. The other, called dopamine, affects how you move, your mood, as well as your sleep. Some health conditions worsen your odds of getting the condition. People with Parkinson's disease or REM sleep behavior disorders have a much higher risk of getting Lewy body dementia. However, there is no medical test or one test that can confirm a Lewy body dementia diagnosis with 100% accuracy. Different specialists, including neurologists, geriatric psychiatrists, neuropsychologists, and geriatric physicians, make the diagnosis of probable Lewy body dementia based on the combined results of tests and patients' symptoms. So there are different risk factors that are associated with Lewy body dementia. There are a few factors that increase your risk of getting it. One would be age. People that are above the age of 60 are at greater risk. Sex. Lewy body dementia affects more men than it does women, as well as family history. Those who have a family member with Lewy body dementia or Parkinson's disease are at much greater risk. So there are a couple signs and symptoms that are unique to Lewy body dementia versus Alzheimer's or vascular dementia. The first of these would include visual hallucinations. The hallucinations is characterized by seeing things that aren't there and might be one of the first symptoms of Lewy body dementia, and they often are reoccurring. People with Lewy body dementia might hallucinate shapes, animals, or people, have different auditory, olfactory, or tactile hallucinations. So different forms of these hallucinations are possible. As I've mentioned before, different kinds of movement disorders such as Parkinson's disease or Parkinsonian signs are very similar or very much characterized with Lewy body dementia. So slowed movement, rigid muscles, tremors, shuffling walks, and those things not only, like I said, are characterized by Parkinson's, but they also put the person at risk for falling. Poor regulation of body functions, which is associated with your autonomic nervous system. So this includes blood pressure, pulse, sweating, and the digestive process are regulated by part of the nervous system that is often affected by Lewy body dementia. So this type of dementia kind of takes over those autonomic processes. So one day your blood pressure could be really up, whereas some days it can be really low. And same thing with sweating. So you're really hot or you're really cold. More often not, I've seen it that a lot of people with Lewy body dementia are more often cold than they are hot. And they like their rooms about like 75 to 77 degrees, which would cause me to die, but that's how they are characterized. When it comes to cognition, there are difficulties processing, which again is very similar to the other types of dementia, such as Alzheimer's or vascular dementia. So confusion, poor attention, visual spatial problems, and memory loss. Sleep difficulties, this is another one that is just kind of right on the money when making a diagnosis of Lewy body dementia. You might have rapid eye movement, sleep behavior disorders, which can cause the person to physically act out of the dreams when they're asleep. And this might involve different kinds of behaviors such as punching, kicking, yelling, and screaming while sleeping. Fluctuating attention, so prolonged periods of drowsiness, long periods of staring into space, long naps during the day, or disorganized speech are all very possible when a person has this. Additionally, just depression and apathy, so the loss of motivation, depression, things like that. So again, just kind of elaborating more on some of the big skills and more so I'd say the big ticket items that would classify this diagnosis. So one would be thinking skills, so trouble making decisions, judging distances, multitasking, planning, organizing, remembering, a lot of loss of concentration. So it's very hard for a person with Lewy body dementia to focus on one thing. They often can go between different different types of engagement. And on kind of the flip side of that, it also could just be staring into nothingness for prolonged periods of time. And then hallucinations also very much affect them. Some movement skills that are affected include shuffling or slow walking, balance problems or falling a lot, stiff muscles, tremors or shaking hands, and stooped posture. The next would be sleep. So REM sleep behavior disorders, as I mentioned, just kind of acting out violently in bed is something that is one of the first signs or symptoms that people do see. And people that do have REM sleep behaviors beforehand are also, people that have REM sleep behavior disorders characterized before a Lewy body dementia diagnosis are more susceptible and more at risk for actually having Lewy body dementia. And trouble falling asleep or staying asleep, they also enjoy a lot of naps during the day. And oftentimes, in my experience, I've seen people take upwards of 2 to 3 hour naps per day in addition to just a normal night's rest. And restless leg syndrome are all a part of sleep. Additionally, when it comes to mood, depression or lack of interest, anxiety, delusions, a very common delusion that a lot of people with Lewy body dementia do have is thinking that someone that's a friend or a relative is an imposter and impersonating a loved one. So those are kind of, like I said, the tell-all signs and symptoms of a Lewy body dementia. But as I kind of previously mentioned as well, there's not one single test that can definitively tell you whether it's Lewy body. All right, so then how do you kind of come to this diagnosis? So sorry, I skipped one. So a lot of people ask me in this field what the real difference between Lewy body dementia and other forms of dementia are. Alzheimer's has a much more prominent memory loss component to it. With Lewy body dementia, you don't really lose your memory as quickly or as fast as Alzheimer's. And in addition to that, with Lewy body, a lot of your long-term memory stays around. Short-term memory can still, vary, but the long-term memory sticks with an individual a lot longer than other forms of dementia. Also, movement symptoms are more likely to be an important cause of disability early in Lewy body dementia than Alzheimer's. And this just is solely because, with Lewy body dementia, there's all those movement skills that I talked about that put a person at increased risk of falling. Walking, balance, those kinds of things can lead to a fall. And as well as that, a lot of the hallucinations are a barrier because people will get up without a walker or try to get out of a wheelchair because of some kind of hallucination they're experiencing. So the movement and hallucinations kind of go hand in hand. And REM sleep disorder, as I've mentioned before, is just a really big characteristic of Lewy body dementia. And that really isn't a factor when it comes to Alzheimer's or vascular dementia. And lastly, the disruption of the autonomic nervous system. So blood pressure dropping or standing, dizziness, falls, and urinary incontinence is much more common in early onset Lewy body dementia than it is more common in early onset Alzheimer's. So given all this information, there's a lot of factors that go into making a Lewy body dementia diagnosis. So autonomic dysfunction, which involves instability in blood pressure and heart rate, poor regulation of body temperature, sweating, and related signs and symptoms such as Lewy body dementia diagnosis. So there's also an interesting component with Lewy body dementia where there's a sensitivity to antipsychotic drugs, particularly first generation antipsychotics such as Haldol, and medications like Haldol aren't used for people with Lewy body dementia because they can cause such a severe reaction. So that's just kind of an interesting piece. And in addition to just some of the tests that kind of take place, the neurological and physical examination, doctor may check for signs of Parkinson's disease, strokes, tumors, or other medical conditions that can affect the brain and physical functioning. A neuro exam would include looking at reflexes, different ability or different tests that assess strength, walking, muscle tone, eye movements, balance, and sense of touch. For an assessment of mental abilities, a short form of this test, there's a couple of different short-term mental tests that take place, such as the MOCA or the BCAT. Those are two pretty common ones. But just a short test that will assess memory and thinking skills and can be done in less than 10 minutes in a doctor's office typically. It's not generally very useful when diagnosing Lewy body dementia versus Alzheimer's, because again, there is that, it is both dementia, so there is going to be some form of, memory loss. But as I mentioned previously, with Lewy body dementia, your memory's sticking around for a lot longer than that early onset Alzheimer's. And as well as with Alzheimer's, you're losing that short-term memory a lot faster compared to Lewy body. Blood tests can rule out different physical problems, such as a vitamin B12 deficiency or an underactive thyroid gland. Brain scans such as an MRI or CT scan can be used to identify a stroke or bleeding and rule out a tumor. Dementias are diagnosed based on the medical history and physical examination, and certain features on imaging studies can suggest different types of dementia. So again, as one of the previous slides shows, those kind of clusters of proteins, you can see those in different imaging scans. And again, there's not an official one test that can confirm it, but usually if you see a buildup of those Lewy bodies, it's very indicative of Lewy body dementia. Sleep evaluation. So as I mentioned, REM sleep behavior is a huge component. So a sleep evaluation can check for autonomic functioning and to look for how the heart rate and blood pressure is when an individual is sleeping, as well as just monitor how their body's moving. This isn't used so much in the United States, but a heart test, doctors might order a myocardial scintigraphy to check the blood flow to the heart. And I know that researchers are working on different biomarkers to see, just to conduct early onset testing. So once kind of these things are all said and done and these different tests confirm that a diagnosis of Lewy body dementia is made, these are kind of the next steps in kind of what to do. So establishing a support system is going to be the most critical. The family and close friends are more than likely aware of an individual's change in thinking and movement and behavior. So really just becoming educated on what Lewy body dementia does look like and taking the time to identify the people that are going to make a difference once a diagnosis is made. So building that team to help manage just kind of the disease. And this can include things like managing everyday tasks such as taking medication, paying bills, and driving. And, the disease is going to progress. So beginning to identify how family and friends can play a role in becoming a caregiver. And just really remembering that the disease not only affects the person who's been diagnosed, but it's going to affect the people that are going to be caring for them. The next part would be taking steps to be safe. As I mentioned, Lewy body has a very particular component of how the body functions and how much it moves. And there's a huge lack of safety awareness. So there should be precautions in place to ensure that the home is safe for the individual to be in. So this can include, there's different cards that an individual can carry with them that go in their wallet, and it just alerts a medical professional if something was to happen that this person has Lewy body dementia. And it can include, just different medication sensitivities or what doctors is the person's preference. Investing or subscribing to a medical alert device, which would allow someone to press a button and be connected to 911 or some kind of other medical service. And again, as I mentioned before, just making sure that the home itself is safe. So that could include stairs and lighting, cluttered hallways, and just thinking about different home modifications that might need to take place and starting to kind of plan ahead for that. Stairs become very difficult as a person ages, or in general, but particularly with Lewy body, given the tremors and the shuffling of the legs, making sure that the bathroom is safe, things like that. And just another factor to consider, especially with early onset, is driving and being evaluated by a doctor. So the next would just be planning ahead and different ways to plan ahead. An important piece to consider, I think, and in my experience, has been to take steps as early as possible. So having the person understand their diagnosis for one, and establishing what would be important to them as the disease progresses. So begin to work with a legal and financial expert about planning for this disability and what retirement can look like. Lewy body dementia is going to interfere with work performance over time. So again, just understanding the benefits, your health insurance benefits and how that's going to play a role, as well as consulting with an attorney who specializes in elder law and estate planning to help write or update a living will, healthcare power of attorney will, and other documents. And then just identifying the resources that you're going to need before the disease progresses much further, such as home care, meals, or again, just an expert in a medical service. Another thing to think about and start planning for is exploring a retirement community or continuing care community where, the person can have the disease progress and still be cared for in a very safe and engaging environment. And lastly, and kind of the most important part, is to participate in things that the individual enjoys. So again, Lewy body disease really fluctuates, and how it can look on one day can differ from another, but it's still important to have that engagement piece and have that involvement piece. So making a list of things that individual enjoys before the disease gets to the point where they feel like they can't participate anymore. Just so, caregivers have it and know things that person can connect to. So listening to music, exercise, going out for meals, things that an individual is going to find pleasure in doing. So now kind of what to expect as the disease progresses. So as I kind of mentioned on the last slide, one of the most important pieces is just planning for what it's going to look like as the disease progresses, but it's also important, that caregivers and loved ones understand what to expect. So as I've mentioned, Lewy body does not progress the same way that Alzheimer's does. It does have more characteristics that fluctuate. So for early stages in general, the earlier stages of Lewy body dementia may involve hallucinations or other distortions of reality, such as delusions, restlessness, acting out dreams during sleep. And some people may appear to freeze or get stuck as they're moving around, and others may develop urinary urgency and incontinence. Unlike Alzheimer's disease, memory is usually still pretty intact in the early ages, although confusion and some mild cognitive changes may be present. So just kind of tying it back to the last slide, those early stages is really the stages to get planning started. So that way the person is still very much honored and involved in what life looks like kind of post progression, and like how it's going to look in that later stages. So that way the family isn't necessarily stuck making the decisions. The person is empowered to make those decisions early on. with middle stages. As Lewy body dementia progresses towards its middle stages, symptoms develop that more strongly resemble Parkinson's disease, such as increased impairment of the body's motor functions and falls, difficulty with speech, impaired ability to swallow, and increased paranoia and delusions. Cognition also continues to decline, and these changes often include decreased attention and significant periods of confusion. So this is really when that person hits that fall risk category, and there's a lot more lack of control on their part. They're a bit more impulsive. And again, that just creates that fall risk. So really ensuring that the home is safe, looking into, different communities to reside in. So that way, when they hit these late stages, they really have the care in place. So in the later symptoms of Lewy body dementia, extreme muscle rigidity and sensitivity to touch develops. Care becomes necessary for almost all activities of daily living. So that includes toileting, showering, dressing. Speech is often very difficult and may be whispered or absent. So it's very hard for them to speak kind of how I am right now. And it's much more soft, and they have difficulty getting words out. Lewy body dementias typically cause the individual to become very susceptible to pneumonia and other infections due to weakness, which may eventually be the end-all cause of death. So another good way to think about Lewy body dementia and understanding, where an individual is looking at the 7 stages. So stage 1 is relatively normal, no symptoms. MRI or CT scans might show those early on protein clusters forming, and daytime sleepiness with hallucinations and mood fluctuations are noticed in some people. Then you graduate to stage 2, which is very mild symptoms, which can include, again, just kind of what I just said about sleepiness and hallucinations, but now there's a little bit more forgetfulness and forgetting names, or having trouble locating familiar objects, and slight difficulty with their daily work and daily activities. Stage 3 is mild memory loss, forgetfulness, concentration problems. This is really when the risk of falling occurs and difficulty continuing their work. Stage 4 is usually when, it's been confirmed that this disease has been diagnosed. There's choking, difficulty swallowing, aspiration, and excessive drooling. Patients often begin to experience tremors and difficulty speaking. The cognition is really becoming life disrupting, difficulty performing daily responsibilities, continuous supervision is going to be required, a lot of daytime sleeping, and just at greater risk for health problems. Stage 5 is significant memory loss and confusion. About 24-hour supervision is going to be needed. Cannot perform simple tasks, severe delusions and hallucinations, increased paranoia, and requiring assistance for eating and all self-care. Stage 6, this part usually lasts for about 2.5 years, and severity in symptoms is very much increased. The person is usually completely incontinent. They've lost their ability to speak. They have very hard times remembering things in the short term, and can only usually recover very small memories from early on. And a high level of support is going to be needed to live comfortably. Stage 7, the last stage, communication is very limited, and physical systems may also begin to decline, and patients are also unable to walk in this stage of dementia and require round-the-clock care. So one of the greatest challenges with Lewy body dementia is just, and as you see here, just acceptance for the person receiving the diagnosis, acceptance of the person loving someone with that, and acceptance of the disease for the person caring for someone with dementia, Lewy body dementia specifically. So, you know, it's really important to understand the responsibilities that are going to take place again. And as I just mentioned with those 7 stages, not everything happens all at one time. Not everything's just suddenly going to be really bad. There's not going to be one day that the person wakes up and can't do it for themselves anymore. And even on days where they feel like they can't do it for themselves anymore, it could be, you know, back to doing it themselves another day. Lewy body has such great fluctuation. So what a person can really do is just begin to utilize resources such as day centers, different caring communities, respite cares, and investigating support groups. And the other piece is, you know, education, understanding what Lewy body dementia disease is, and also understanding how it's different than Alzheimer's, how it's different than Parkinson's, even though Parkinson's and Lewy body dementia are very similar, but they still have those distinct differences itself. You know, when going to the hospitals, just informing all staff that, you know, this person has this, and so that way they're able to kind of adjust care. Preparing for emergencies, so having medications and dosages of those medications on hand, a list of the person's conditions, including allergies to medications or food, copies of health insurance cards, copies of advance directives, and contact information. And when it comes to caring for someone, I think it's important to adjust the expectations. You know, you will likely experience a wide range of emotions as you care for someone with Lewy body dementia. Sometimes caregiving will feel loving and rewarding, and other times it's going to be a lot of anger and impatience and resentment and fatigue. But recognizing, you know, your own strengths and limitations, especially in light of the relationship with the person that you're caring for, you know, just understanding that change in roles. People approach challenges at varied places. Some people want to learn everything as much as possible and be prepared for every scenario, whereas others don't. But just, you know, yes, it's important to plan for the future, but it's also important to focus the time around creating enjoyable and meaningful moments. Something that can also help with challenges is just establishing a very peaceful routine, something that the person's going to become, you know, very familiar with. The next is just understanding the behavioral changes, behavioral and mood problems in people with Lewy body dementia. Sorry. Just continuing to find time to care for yourself when you're caring for someone with Lewy body dementia, and discussing Lewy body dementia with the family and friends, and you know, begin to make a plan for end of life. And again, those are all challenges that the person's going to face, but it's going to be less of a challenge when the disease progresses. So establishing those things early on is very important. So how to manage everyday life. So I got this piece actually from an individual who has Lewy body dementia, and he started documenting his journey with, you know, early onset to the point where, you know, he couldn't write about it anymore, but his family posted about it. And this was, you know, his advice for managing. So just education, and I think that I've stressed that a lot with the last slide, but just educating the people that are going to be caring for you, and educating the caregiver itself. I mean, in tons of facilities and tons of, you know, different day programs, you know, it looks different for everyone, whether you have Lewy body or not. Like, caring for someone looks different. So educating the people that not only love you, but care for you as well. His advice was to focus on the good days. Again, Lewy body is also characterized by fluctuation in ability and functioning. So again, some days are great and some days aren't. So there should be a real emphasis on the good and taking joy in the good. Take care of the caregiver, the people that are caring for the loved one. You know, there needs to be a mental health day. There needs to be that time set aside to care for yourself and, you know, kind of create that boundary. You know, you can't give 100% of yourself to someone else and not focus on you at all. Be wise in the battles that you choose. Sometimes the delusions and hallucinations can take over, and I think it's very much in people's nature to correct. But correcting dementia doesn't always work, obviously. And so pick which battles you want to engage in. Be intentional about scheduling activities. So ensuring that you're finding engagement and meaningful purpose in life. And again, that looks different for everyone. So for some people, it can be folding laundry. For some people, it's learning how to play the piano even. I've seen both those things and both are meaningful for the other. For physical exercise, again, just the body is constantly kind of in motion with Lewy body dementia. So finding ways that person can engage their core, engage their legs, engage their upper extremities. So finding some kind of, you know, either exercise class or swimming, you know, whatever's going to be important. So Don Kent is actually the one that wrote the slide that I just shared about. So I'm just going to kind of continue on with some of things that he was saying and things that have happened that he found were challenging, what it's like now, and kind of his advice for living with Lewy body. So he was diagnosed in March 2017, and he was a trial lawyer with a wife named Cynthia and 3 children. So he received the Lewy body diagnosis, and his most prominent symptom was hallucinations and delusions. He did have some sleep-related behavior, but again, the hallucinations and delusions were his top 2. And so he began, as the disease kind of progressed for him, he got a lot more foggy. He had a lot of difficulty concentrating, and he noticed different personality changes. And he was constantly telling his wife that he just didn't feel like himself. He didn't feel like he was the same person some days. But he was very aware of that and how some days were good and how some days were bad. So he has this part here of what it's like now, and it says he has some clear days and some fuzzy days, and it's made it impossible for him to return to work. His wife says that he has hallucinations that include seeing, smelling, and hearing things that are not there. And Don now has difficulty communicating and typically sleeps throughout the day until he feels like his mind is clear. Some of the delusions and hallucinations that he's had was hearing knocking on the door or people talking in the next room over, that there was a train traveling through the house, smelling things such as a smoke or a fire, and seeing a dog that had already passed away, and seeing snakes and spiders. So Don's kind of advice for living with Lewy body dementia, his big takeaway was understanding the relief of the diagnosis and understanding that kind of the things that he, you know, was experiencing wasn't out of pocket for that diagnosis. He didn't feel, he originally, I guess, had felt like he was going crazy, but the diagnosis again kind of gave him comfort because he was able to educate himself and understand what that, you know, what that is. And understanding the signs and symptoms made him kind of focus and plan for his future. So he decided to find the new purpose in life, which was educating himself as well as others on Lewy body, and speaking with different medical professionals gave him great comfort about how he could age well and age healthy. So Cynthia, his wife, understands that many people are dealing with loss and disease, and she encourages people to find and learn as much as possible. She says it's important to remember that people are not dying from dementia. They are living with dementia, and there is hope. So again, in my experience in memory care, these are some things that I find very important for people with Lewy body dementia. Music is such a beautiful, meaningful way for people to connect and engage. So there are different music therapists located, throughout the country. And, we're really lucky at Kensington to have a music therapist on staff. And again, it just offers a different level of engagement and connection. Music is something that people connect to, and sound or music hits a different area in the brain. So people are still able to connect to it even as the disease progresses. Early life cognitive enrichment. So again, just keeping the mind as active and engaged as possible, keeping that blood pumping, keeping the engagement going. It's really difficult because a lot of times they get very tired, as I had mentioned, but staying awake and staying involved are important. And not just cognitively, but physically as well. I said swimming earlier, and I say that because when I was working at another community, swimming at one of our community centers was really meaningful for a gentleman with Lewy body. And he said that it just made him feel like he was in control, and the water was just extremely therapeutic for him. And this just kind of goes one with what staff members at a facility can see, what caregivers can understand, what loved ones can understand, but just honoring the level in which the person's falling, trying to, bring that person back to early onset. It's just not going to happen. It's a progressive disease, unfortunately. So it's important to just understand what's important to that individual and honor the person that he or she is now. So that's all that I have.
Well, Megan, thank you very much for that. It was obviously very thought-provoking for our audience, as I have several questions here. So we've got just a couple of minutes. We promised this would be a quick presentation. So I'm going to pick a couple and see if we can get some answers. This one, I believe we may have heard the answer, but I'm going to go ahead and read it. It says, are REM sleep disorders, depression, and apathy a differential diagnosis for Lewy body dementia as opposed to other forms of dementia or Parkinson's?
So depression and apathy can kind of be displayed in all forms of dementia, whether it be Alzheimer's, vascular, what have you, Lewy body. But, the REM sleep portion of it is very distinct to Lewy body. Those two are very connected. And the REM sleep, Lewy body, and Parkinson's all kind of live together. They're all very connected, as opposed to where depression and apathy can kind of be sprinkled into all forms of dementia.
Very good, thank you. The next one, I have a relative suspected of having Lewy body dementia, and unexplained infections have been an issue. Is this common with the disease, and is there anything that can be done to prevent this from happening?
So with Lewy body, it takes a little bit longer for ADL care to be needed. However, one of the ones that happens at first is urinary incontinence. So oftentimes, the memory is still there to where they feel embarrassed if ever there's an episode of incontinence, but that kind of wetness can lead to an infection. And it doesn't always necessarily present as a UTI. It can be other kinds of infection, but there's not necessarily anything that can be done to prevent it, just more so just ensuring that the person's clean, healthy, just regular checkups with a physician.
Next question, is the MOCA, M-O-C-A, a test or a screen? What's the difference?
So MOCA is a cognitive test that's done, and it's just a couple of just cognition questions, such as repeat these 4 words back to me, count back from 7. It's not a screening, it's just a cognitive test that's administered.
What do you do when someone is experiencing a hallucination?
When someone's experiencing a hallucination, it's important to just kind of play into their reality. I think that's an important component of all dementia, but just getting them to kind of understand and whatever is going to make them feel safe and validated in that moment. You don't want to argue with them and get them angry or upset. That can lead to a plethora of other problems. So just kind of validating that experience that someone has and just redirecting them to something else.
Final question we have here. Do people with Parkinson's always have a cognitive shift?
Not always. Usually at the later stages of Parkinson's, it happens, but it's not necessarily, like I said, with dementia. It's not so progressive. Usually at the end of a person with Parkinson's life, there's a shift in cognition, but if it's solely a Parkinson's diagnosis, that person can remain cognitively intact for quite some time.
Thank you. That concludes our questions and our presentation for this evening. Several of you have asked about a recording. This has been recorded. We will make it available on our website. We will also email. Oh, wait a minute, I've got one more. All right, oh, this is just a comment, but I'll read it aloud so people can hear. Thank you so much for this thorough presentation. I was primary caregiver for my grandmother during the late 90s. Her primary care doctor had diagnosed her with Parkinson's and dementia, so I was unaware of the Lewy body diagnosis until her condition had progressed to the need for a nursing home. There she was, diagnosed with Lewy body. The internet was not in full swing, and I went through her illness with very little information. This webinar was very telling. Thank you. What a wonderful, little note there. Thank you very much for that. So again, we will be posting this video on our website. We will send it the link attached to an email for those who have participated and registered. Thank you for your time this evening. Thank you for the presentation, Megan, and I hope that everyone has a nice evening. Thank you and take care. Bye-bye.